We will start by taking a look at altimetry first. Altimetry refers to the subject of altitude measurements. For ease of understanding, let's tackle some terminology first. Altitude is the vertical distance above mean sea level. Height is the vertical distance above ground or terrain. Elevation is the vertical distance of a point on the ground from mean sea level. This picture will help you visualize the three words and their meaning. Now that we understand the difference between altitude, height, and elevation, let's move to the Q codes. First and the most important one that you will be hearing every single flight is Q and H. Please keep in mind that the three letters Q and H do not actually stand for anything. Q and H is the sea level pressure setting in hectopascals or millibars or inches of mercury, depending on what unit the country you operate within chooses. So the Q and H is a value either reported in the METAR or broadcasted in ADIS or communicated by ETC to pilots. This value, when entered into the altimeter scale, your altimeter will read your altitude above mean sea level. Also know that when you are sitting on your airplane on the apron and you set your altimeter to the local Q&A setting, your altimeter will read your elevation. Like we have said earlier, the elevation is the vertical distance of a point on the ground from mean sea level. Please keep in mind that surface pressure is constantly changing. Therefore, if you do not periodically update your QNH, your altitude profile will fluctuate. This is dangerous as you may drop below your minimum safe altitude. Now, here's a question. Let's suppose your airport elevation is 50 feet above mean sea level, and for some reason you are unable to get the QNH. Say there is no means of getting that QNH. How do you figure out what is the QNH? The answer is pretty easy. All you have to do is track the process backwards, meaning that we know that when we set the QNH value in the altimeter reads elevation if we are on the ground and altitude if we are airborne. Since we are on the ground and we know that the airport elevation is constant, in this example 50 feet, then we twist the altimeter knob until the altitude reads 50 feet, and whatever the pressure value reads, that becomes the local QNH setting. Next, QFE. Again, the three letters themselves do not stand for anything. QFE pressure setting is the value that corresponds to height above ground. This means when we set the QFE into our altimeter, the altimeter will read 0 feet when on the ground or when on the apron. QFE is rarely used in the airline industry nowadays, but it might be used by aerobatic pilots in air shows. Please note that airports that are exactly sea level, the QFE and QNH will be at the same value. However, if the airport is at a certain elevation, in this case the QFE will be lower. The reason is that the higher we go up in altitude, the pressure drops, and since QFE is a pressure setting, it also drops. Next one, QNE. QNE, also known as pressure altitude setting. QNE is the altitude above 1013 hectopascals reference. When you set your altimeter to 1013 or to 2992 inches of mercury, your altimeter indicates pressure altitude. QNE, or standard pressure setting of 1013 hectopascals, is the altimeter setting to be used when flying at or above the transition altitude. Last one is QFF. QFF is not used in aviation, it is rather used by meteorologists. The best way to explain QFF is to look at this picture. The QFE, if reduced to mean sea level using standard atmospheric values or ISA, we get QNH. However, if we reduce the QFE using the actual atmospheric conditions and temperature lapse rates, we obtain QFF. Let me put it this way. QNH is sea level pressure based on standard lapse rate. QFF, on the other hand, is the actual sea level pressure based on actual lapse rates. Don't focus too much on QFF as it is not used in aviation and probably you'll never ever hear about it. Alright, before we move on to the navigational Q codes, let's have a look at this animation as a summary of what we have just discussed. You may go ahead and take a screenshot and keep it with you if you ever needed to remember which one is which later on, even though I believe after this video you will never ever confuse them again.